There's a mathematical pattern in history that has destroyed every dominant superpower over the last 5 centuries. In 2025, as I speak, the United States is falling into the exact same pattern, step by step, stage by stage, decision by decision. It's as if we're watching a documentary woven from the same script that has led to catastrophe every single time before. The downfall is initiated not through war, not through revolution or corrupt bureaucratic framework, but through economic exhaustion and currency collapse. And it happens the exact same way, in the exact same sequence, every single time. In 1588, Spain controlled half the world's wealth. Their silver mines produced more precious metal than had ever existed in human history. The Spanish real was the first global reserve currency. Within 112 years, they declared bankruptcy 4 times and collapsed into permanent irrelevance. In 1914, the British Empire governed 458 million people across 1/4 of Earth's landmass. The pound sterling backed 60% of global trade. London was the financial center of the world. Within 45 years, the empire was gone. The currency had lost 87% of its value, and Britain became a secondary power that never recovered. In 1985, the Soviet Union was a nuclear superpower with satellites circling the globe and client states on every continent. 6 years later, it ceased to exist, not from invasion, from complete economic implosion. The collapse took 900 days from the first crack to total dissolution. 3 times, 3 superpowers, 3 complete collapses following an identical 7-stage sequence. And here's what should terrify you. The United States has already completed 5 of those 7 stages. We're not approaching the pattern. We're 71% of the way through it. This is the story of how superpowers destroy themselves, why they always believe they're different, and why the mathematics say we're next. And unlike the others, we're accelerating. Before we break down the pattern, you need to understand what imperial economic collapse actually looks like. Not in history books, in practice. What happens when a superpower runs out of money? Imperial collapse doesn't begin with military defeat. It starts decades earlier with economic overextension. The empire expands beyond its ability to sustain itself. Military commitments on multiple continents, promises to citizens it can't afford to keep. Debts accumulating faster than the economy grows. At first, the decline is invisible. The currency still functions. Markets remain open. The government continues making promises. But beneath the surface, the foundation is rotting. Resources flow to unproductive sectors. The most talented citizens begin leaving. Innovation slows as bureaucracy hardens. Then comes the acceleration phase. Allies start preparing alternatives. Adversaries test boundaries. Trading partners quietly reduce their exposure. The reserve currency status begins eroding. And suddenly, all the advantages that made the empire powerful become vulnerabilities. The currency that everyone once demanded comes flooding back, causing inflation. The military spread across the world becomes impossibly expensive to maintain.
I'm here to announce the completion of our withdrawal from Afghanistan and the end of the military mission to evacuate American citizens, third country nationals, and vulnerable Afghans.
Promises backed by strength become empty words when strength falters. That's not theory. That's what happened to Spain, Britain, and the Soviet Union. And it happened because they made exactly the decisions we're making right now. They believed their power was permanent. They overextended their military. They debased their currency. And they refused to acknowledge reality until collapse was already underway. Let's examine how it actually happened. 3 times, the exact same way. Spain, 1500s to 1700s. This is where the pattern was first documented in its modern form. After Christopher Columbus reached the Americas in 1492, Spain became the first true global empire. Hernán Cortés conquered the Aztec Empire in 1521. Francisco Pizarro destroyed the Inca Empire by 1533. By 1545, Spanish conquistadors had discovered Cerro Rico in Potosí, modern-day Bolivia. This wasn't just a silver mine. It was the richest deposit of precious metal ever found. For the next century, Potosí produced 45% of the world's silver. By 1550, Spanish galleons were transporting 200 tons annually across the Atlantic. By 1600, over 400 tons every year. Spain controlled Europe's money supply. The Spanish real became the world's first global reserve currency. Every merchant from London to Istanbul to Manila wanted Spanish silver. And this is where stage 1 begins. The belief that controlling the world's money makes you invincible. King Philip II ruled from 1556 to 1598 with more wealth than any monarch in human history. And he spent every ounce of it pursuing empire. Stage 1. Military overextension. Spain fought wars simultaneously on 4 continents, against the Ottoman Empire for control of the Mediterranean, against France and various Italian states for European dominance, against Protestant rebels in the Netherlands who were rejecting Catholic rule, against England's navy after the failed Spanish Armada, wars in the Philippines, wars throughout the Americas, suppressing indigenous resistance. By 1580, half of Spain's annual revenue went to military expenses. And it still wasn't enough. Stage 2, currency debasement. The Spanish crown couldn't pay its bills through taxation alone, so they did what every failing empire does. They debased the currency. They started mixing copper into silver coins. A coin stamped as pure silver became 50% copper by 1580, then 75% copper by 1600. The face value remained identical. The actual value plummeted. By 1620, Spanish silver coins contained barely 20% silver. Merchants stopped accepting them at face value. Prices exploded across Europe. What cost 1 real in 1550 cost 15 reals by 1650. That's 1,400% inflation in a century. Stage 3, debt spiral. Spain borrowed constantly, from Italian bankers in Genoa, from German merchant houses in Augsburg, from anyone who would lend. In 1557, just 20 years into Philip II's reign, Spain declared bankruptcy. They defaulted on all debts, restructured under worse terms, and immediately began borrowing again. They declared bankruptcy again in 1560, again in 1575, again in 1596. 4 sovereign defaults in 40 years. Each time, they promised reforms. Each time, they went right back to deficit spending and borrowing. Despite controlling half the world's silver production, Spain couldn't meet its obligations. Stage 4, loss of productive capacity. Here's what historians often miss about Spain's collapse. They had infinite money, and it destroyed them. When you can import anything, you stop producing. Why grow food when you can buy it from France? Why build ships when Dutch shipyards are better? Why innovate when you can just purchase finished goods? Spanish nobility considered manual work beneath their station. Manufacturing collapsed. Agriculture stagnated. All the silver that flowed in from the Americas flowed right back out to buy French wine, Italian silk, Dutch textiles, and German weapons. Spain became a conduit. Wealth passed through them, but generated nothing domestically. By 1640, Spain produced almost nothing of value. They depended entirely on silver imports to pay for imported goods. When the Potosi mines production began declining in the 1650s, the entire economic model collapsed. Stage 5, social decay. With the economy failing, Spanish cities descended into crisis. Crime rates exploded, beggars filled Madrid's streets. Productive citizens emigrated to France, England, and the Netherlands, places that were building things and creating wealth. Spain was left with bureaucrats consuming tax revenue, soldiers consuming military budgets, and priests consuming church tithes. No one was creating anything. Everyone was consuming. By 1640, Portugal broke away after 60 years of Spanish rule. By 1648, the 30 Years' War ended with Spain losing the Netherlands, their wealthiest territory. By 1700, the Spanish Empire was economically dead, still large on maps, still controlling vast territories, but producing nothing and surviving on the fumes of past glory. They went from the world's superpower to a secondary European power in 112 years. Today, Spain is a pleasant regional country with beautiful architecture. The descendants of conquistadors are a tourist attraction. That's what imperial collapse looks like. Britain, 1914 to 1975. Let's jump forward 3 centuries. Britain, 1914 to 1975. The empire where the sun never set. At its peak, in 1920, Britain governed 458 million people across 13.7 million square miles. 1/4 of humanity, 1/4 of Earth's landmass. The pound sterling was the global reserve currency. 60% of international trade contracts were denominated in pounds. Every central bank held British government bonds as reserves. London's financial district set interest rates for the world. And just like Spain 300 years earlier, they believed it was permanent. But by 1900, the pattern was already beginning. Stage 1, military overextension. Britain had military commitments everywhere. India required 70,000 troops just to maintain order. Africa demanded garrisons across dozens of colonies. The Middle East needed protection after oil discoveries in Persia. China required naval presence to protect trade concessions. The Pacific Islands needed administration. The Caribbean colonies needed defense. Britain was defending territory on 6 continents simultaneously. The cost was staggering. And when World War I erupted in August 1914, Britain faced an impossible choice. Stay neutral and watch Europe destroy itself, or intervene and bankrupt the empire to win. They chose to fight. World War I cost Britain $40 billion in 1918 money. That's equivalent to $1.1 trillion today. They borrowed from everyone, primarily from the United States, which went from debtor nation to Britain's primary creditor in 4 years. By 1918, Britain owed America $4.7 billion. The creditor had become the debtor. But they'd won the war. They kept the empire intact. They believed they could rebuild. They were catastrophically wrong. Stage 2, currency debasement. The pound sterling was supposed to be backed by gold at a fixed rate. But the war had drained Britain's gold reserves. They'd shipped gold to America to pay for weapons, food, and ammunition. By 1920, Britain's gold reserves were 43% of pre-war levels, but they tried maintaining the pound's value anyway. In 1925, Chancellor Winston Churchill made a fateful decision. Britain returned to the gold standard at the pre-war exchange rate of $4.86 per pound. The problem? The pound was dramatically overvalued at that rate. British exports became unaffordable on world markets. Manufacturing declined. Unemployment soared past 10%. The government had to maintain brutally high interest rates to defend the currency, which strangled domestic economic growth. By September 1931, Britain couldn't sustain it anymore. They abandoned the gold standard permanently. The pound lost 25% of its value overnight. The global reserve currency had just admitted it couldn't honor its promises. Stage 3, debt spiral. Britain never recovered from World War I's debt burden. Then World War II began in 1939. Another $120 billion in costs. More massive borrowing, again primarily from America. By 1945, Britain owed the United States and Canada over $31 billion, more than Britain's entire GDP. The war was won. Nazi Germany was defeated. But the British Empire was financially finished. They could no longer afford to defend it, couldn't maintain it, couldn't suppress independence movements. The money was gone. Stage 4, loss of empire. In August 1947, Britain granted India independence. The crown jewel of the empire, the source of wealth for 200 years gone in a single day. Over the next 25 years, they lost everything. Malaya, Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania, Nigeria, Ghana, Cyprus, Malta, Aden, every African colony, every Asian possession, every Middle Eastern mandate. By 1970, the British Empire existed only in history books. The territories that once generated wealth now governed themselves. Stage 5, currency collapse. And the pound kept falling. In 1940, 1 pound bought 4.03 US dollars. By 1950, $2.80. By 1967, $2.40. In November 1967, Britain devalued again. By 1976, the pound had collapsed to $1.57. The government went begging to the International Monetary Fund for a $3.9 billion bailout. The global reserve currency was now a distressed asset requiring international rescue. Britain maintained the pretense of power, permanent seat on the UN Security Council, nuclear weapons, special relationship with America. But everyone understood the reality. They were a former superpower, a museum of past greatness. The empire was gone and never came back. USSR, 1945 to 1991. Now, the most recent example, the one that proves this pattern works in modern economies with nuclear weapons and advanced technology, the Soviet Union, 1945 to 1991. After World War II, the USSR emerged as a superpower. Nuclear weapons, massive conventional military, control over Eastern Europe, satellites orbiting Earth, and they believed they represented the future. Communism would bury capitalism. The Soviet model would dominate the planet. For 45 years, they competed with America, matched us militarily, built more tanks, more missiles, more submarines. But underneath the facade, the economy was dying. Stage 1, military overextension. The Soviet Union spent 15% to 20% of GDP on military expenses. America spent 6%. They had to match American technology, American reach, American alliances, but their economy was 1/3 the size. They were fighting in Afghanistan, propping up Cuba with billions in annual subsidies, supporting Syria, Vietnam, North Korea, Angola, Mozambique, and Ethiopia. Everywhere America had influence, they had to counter. The cost was unsustainable. Stage 2, economic stagnation replacing currency debasement. The Soviet economy stopped growing in the 1970s. Oil revenue kept the government afloat, but nothing else functioned. Factories produced low-quality goods nobody wanted. Collective farms failed to feed the population. Technology fell decades behind the West. By the 1980s, the Soviet Union was importing grain from America and Canada. A country with the world's largest wheat-growing regions couldn't feed itself. Why? Central planning doesn't work. Innovation dies under authoritarian control. No one produces efficiently when there's no personal incentive. Stage 3, currency collapse. The ruble was never a real currency. It couldn't be exchanged internationally. Even Soviet citizens didn't trust it. They used US dollars on the black market whenever possible. The government had to purchase foreign goods with gold and oil because nobody accepted rubles. By 1985, oil prices had crashed from $35 per barrel to under $10. Soviet gold reserves were depleting. They were running out of real money. Stage 4. Loss of empire. In November 1989, the Berlin Wall fell. Within 1 year, Eastern Europe was gone. Poland, Hungary, Czechoslovakia, Romania, Bulgaria, East Germany, all declared independence. The satellite states that provided the USSR with strategic depth vanished. The Soviet government couldn't stop them. They were broke. Military intervention would cost money they didn't have. Stage 5. Complete collapse. On December 26, 1991, the Soviet Union ceased to exist. 900 days from the Berlin Wall's fall to total dissolution. No war, no invasion, pure economic implosion. The military couldn't be paid. The government couldn't function. The ruble became worthless. A superpower with 30,000 nuclear weapons collapsed from internal economic failure. Pensioners lost their savings overnight. The country fragmented into 15 separate nations. 69 years of Soviet power evaporated because the economic model failed. The United States. Present day. 3 empires, 3 collapses, 1 identical pattern. And now we come to the United States. The United States has been the global superpower since 1945. The dollar has been the world's reserve currency since the Bretton Woods Conference in 1944. For 80 years, we've enjoyed privileges no other nation in history has possessed. We can print money and have the world accept it as valuable. We can run massive trade deficits without consequence. We can borrow at lower interest rates than anyone else. But those privileges exist only as long as the world believes in the dollar's stability. And that belief is fracturing. Let's go through the stages, one by one, and see exactly where we are. Stage 1. Military overextension. The United States maintains 750 military bases in 80 countries. We have troops stationed in over 150 nations. We're committed to defending Europe through NATO, an alliance of 31 countries. We're committed to defending Japan, South Korea, the Philippines, Australia, and New Zealand. We're fighting ongoing operations in the Middle East. We're countering China in the Pacific. We're countering Russia in Eastern Europe. Our military budget in 2024 was $886 billion. That's more than the next 10 countries combined. And it's not enough. We're stretched impossibly thin. Equipment is aging faster than we can replace it. Recruitment is down 25% from targets. If China moves on Taiwan, if Russia escalates in Europe, if Iran closes the Strait of Hormuz, we cannot respond to all 3 simultaneously. We're overextended, just like Spain, just like Britain, just like the USSR. Check. Stage 2. Currency debasement. In August 1971, President Nixon closed the gold window. The dollar became a pure fiat currency backed by nothing except the government's promise. Since 2000, the M2 money supply has increased by 380%. Since 2020, we've printed over $6 trillion. The Federal Reserve's balance sheet went from $4 trillion in February 2020 to $9 trillion by April 2022. More money created in 2 years than in the previous century. The dollar has lost 98% of its purchasing power since 1971. We're not mixing copper into silver coins. We're just printing unlimited digital currency. The mechanism is different. The result is identical. Debasement. Check. So, stage 3, debt spiral. The United States owes $36 trillion as of October 2025. Now that's 123% of GDP. Interest payments on the debt are approaching $1 trillion annually. We're spending more on interest than on defense. We run deficits every single year. $1.8 trillion deficit in 2024 during supposed economic growth. During peacetime, and during full employment, we're borrowing money to pay interest on money we've already borrowed. That's the textbook definition of a debt spiral. Spain defaulted 4 times. Britain borrowed until collapse. The USSR ran out of money. We're on the exact same trajectory. Check. Stage 4, loss of productive capacity. America doesn't manufacture things anymore. We design products, we finance transactions, we consume goods, but we don't produce them. Our manufacturing base has been systematically dismantled. Moved to China, Mexico, Vietnam, Bangladesh. We import $800 billion more than we export every single year. We're dependent on foreign supply chains for everything: medicine, electronics, steel, rare earth minerals, even military components. Just like Spain became dependent on imports while silver flowed out, we're dependent on imports while dollars flow out. When the dollar stops being accepted globally, we're in immediate crisis. We can't produce what we need domestically anymore. Check. Stage 5, social decay. Trust in American institutions is at historic lows. Congress approval rating hovers around 20%. Trust in media is under 40%. Trust in the federal government is at 20%. the lowest since measurement began. Crime rates are rising in major cities. Homelessness has increased 48% since 2015. Drug overdoses kill 107,000 Americans annually. Life expectancy declined for 3 consecutive years. The best and brightest are increasingly leaving. 5.4 million Americans now live abroad, the highest in history. Fertility rates have collapsed to 1.6 children per woman, well below replacement. Political dysfunction is total. We can't agree on basic facts, can't pass infrastructure bills, can't fix obvious problems. The signs of social decay are everywhere, but everyone pretends it's fine. It's not fine. Check. We're at stage 5 of 7. The Soviet Union made it to stage 5 before complete collapse in 900 days. Britain made it to stage 5 before losing the empire in 25 years. Spain lasted longer, but the pattern is identical. We're not at the beginning of this sequence. We're 71% of the way through it. Stages 6 and 7. So what's coming? What do stages 6 and 7 actually look like? Stage 6, loss of reserve currency status. This is when the world stops needing dollars. When Saudi Arabia accepts yuan for oil instead of dollars. When the European Union trades with China in euros and yuan, bypassing dollars entirely. When central banks dump treasury bonds because they're diversifying reserves into other currencies and gold. We're already seeing early signs. In 2000, 71% of global foreign exchange reserves were dollars. Today, it's 58% and falling steadily. The BRICS nations, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, plus recent additions, are building alternative payment systems specifically to bypass the dollar. China and Russia conduct bilateral trade in yuan and rubles. Saudi Arabia now accepts yuan for oil sales to China. Central banks purchased 1,080 tons of gold in 2023, the most in decades. They're preparing for dollar decline. When stage 6 fully activates, dollars flood back to America. All those dollars held overseas as reserves, as trade settlement currency, as savings, come home. That's not theoretical, that's mathematical. When global dollar demand drops, dollar supply becomes excessive, and excessive supply causes price collapse. The dollar crashes. Imports become unaffordable overnight, inflation explodes, and we move to stage 7. The stage 7, collapse. Not gradual decline, sudden implosion. The Soviet Union went from superpower to non-existent in 900 days. Britain lost the empire in 20 years. Spain took a century, but the outcome was the same. When the reserve currency fails, when the debt becomes impossible to service, when the military can't be funded, it doesn't decline gracefully. It collapses quickly and brutally. And everyone who thought it can't happen here learns the same lesson every fallen empire learns. It can, and it does. The pattern never lies. 3 empires followed this pattern: Spain, Britain, USSR. Each believed they were exceptional. Each believed they were different. Each believed the rules didn't apply to them. They were wrong every single time. We're telling ourselves the same lies right now. We're different. We have technology. We have the dollar. We're America. But the pattern doesn't care about exceptionalism. The pattern is mathematical. You cannot spend beyond your means forever. You cannot maintain empire without productive capacity. You cannot debase your currency without destroying its value. You cannot avoid stages 6 and 7 once you've completed 1 through 5. The sequence is locked in. The only question is timing. Maybe we have 10 years, maybe 5, maybe less. 2008 was a warning we ignored. 2020's money printing was an acceleration. Since 2020, we've sprinted through these stages faster than any empire in history. Printed more money, accumulated more debt, extended more commitments, hollowed out more production, fractured society more completely. We're not walking toward collapse. We're sprinting. Now here's what history tells us about surviving imperial collapse. Because while empires fail, individuals can prepare. When Rome collapsed, landowners with diversified assets in multiple provinces survived. When Spain declined, merchants who'd moved wealth to Amsterdam and London preserved their fortunes. When Britain fell, families with foreign holdings and hard assets weathered the storm. When the USSR dissolved, those with dollars and gold maintained purchasing power while the ruble evaporated. The pattern for survival is consistent. Productive assets, foreign diversification, hard assets that hold value regardless of currency, skills that travel. This isn't financial advice. This is historical observation. Those who recognized imperial collapse coming had time to prepare. Those who believed it's different this time lost everything. Maybe we'll find a way out. Maybe America can do what Spain, Britain, and the Soviet Union couldn't. Maybe we'll reform. Maybe we'll rebuild productive capacity. Maybe we'll restore currency integrity. Maybe we'll reduce military commitments to sustainable levels. Maybe this time really is different. But the pattern says otherwise. The math says otherwise. And history, which has watched empires die the same way over and over across 5 centuries, says we're about to learn the lesson the hard way. The sequence doesn't lie. We're at stage 5. Stages 6 and 7 are coming. The only variables are speed and severity. If this changed how you see where we actually are in the sequence, subscribe. Because when we hit stage 6, when the dollar's reserve status fractures, when the acceleration everyone denied becomes undeniable, you'll want to understand what's happening and why. The answers aren't hiding in the future. They're written in the past, in 3 empires that followed this exact path. And I'll show you where to look.